But I made sure that, because this is one of the few occasions where I didn't actually know the author or editor, and so I just met Beth tonight. Elizabeth Oberdick Anderson, Beth, graduated from BYU, which for me is a big plus. Not necessarily my kids. None of them wanted to go to Provo. But she is a copy editor. She works for the Journal of Mormon History on the editorial staff. She is currently working on a book of letters of Anthony H. Lund and his wife Sarah Peterson Lund. In fact, Jenny Lund is here tonight with us. Raise your hand, Jenny. She's working together with Beth on that book. And who's publishing?
We don't have a publisher.
Don't have a publisher yet. Okay.
We're still in process.
But anyway, it's always nice when there's another project in the future, and we'll look ahead to that. But we congratulate Beth on this terrific book, and I'm not going to tell you anything about it other than it's another fine set of diaries. In this case, Anthony W. Ivins, who is a fascinating character. Of course, what am I telling you? We got a bunch of his family here, but it's nice to see this in print, and we're grateful to have Beth with us to speak to us tonight. And I'm going to now turn the time over to her, and then we'll go from there after. Thank you so much for coming.
Does that work?
Is that okay?
First off, one correction. I'm working with Jenny. Jenny's the one that's the expert on Anton Lund, not me. That's her husband's grandfather. So, this is really an honor to be here, and it really is exciting and neat, and especially to have the Ivins family here. That's the icing on the cake to me. I have spent 5 years with your ancestor, and it is just wonderful to have you guys here, and I really, really appreciate it. I'm going to try to not read as much from the book, or do things that were in the book, so that you get some different things. So to start off with, I have a letter that I wanted to read you, and this is from Martha Tingey, and she was the second general president of the Young Ladies Mutual Improvement Association, basically the forerunner of the Young Women. And she was asked by Sister Ivins, after her husband had died, to reconstruct a commemorative tribute that had been written for her husband. And this is what Sister Tingey wrote. She said, it's not complete word for word because I'm reconstructing this, but this is basically what we had said. It was a sentiment to Superintendent Anthony W. Ivins, who at the time was the Young Men's Mutual Improvement Association president, but they called him superintendent. One writer has said, a fool may be born noble, but he is truly so whose deeds ennoble himself. I have ever been a great admirer of self-made men, men who were willing to shine, who were not willing to shine by borrowed light, by reflected light, but who had an ambition to make an honorable name and record for themselves. Such is the man to whom it is our pleasure to do honor tonight. Sorry, I'm reading from her actual handwriting, so it's a little bit hard. Born and reared under pioneer conditions, he early learned the necessity for and the value of self-effort. He received from his parents a heritage that is better than gold and silver, houses and lands, a clean, strong, healthy body, a pure, intelligent mind. Thus equipped, he went forth in the battle of life, determined to gain the victory. He put his hand to the plow with his eyes straight ahead. If thorns and briars obtruded the furrow, he removed them and went steadily on. When he met the big rocks of temptation and discouragement, with sincere faith in God and the counsels and example of his parents fresh in his memory, he threw the obstruction to one side and continued to go straight ahead. When Superintendent Ivins' life's history is written, it will be more interesting than any novel, and it will prove him to be a real hero, one of God's and nature's noblemen. He has won the hearts of the people, their confidence and esteem. He has built for himself a monument of love in their hearts that will endure forever. I loved that when she said, more interesting than any novel. I have found Ivins' life to be absolutely fascinating. The man himself was able to accomplish so much, do so much, and just live in a time that when I look now, I wonder how many of us would have been willing to do some of the things that he was asked to do. His life was definitely more interesting than a novel. He was, when he died, there were so many tributes that were given to him about how wonderful a man he was. And the one that, this was not at his death, this was many years later, but J. Raymond Clark said that he was remarkable and courageous. George Albert Smith said he was one of a generation. Governor Henry Blood said no man was more truly loved than he or held in higher esteem. And that's always been, when I read those tributes, I thought, this is really unusual because you don't hear Ivins mentioned much in church circles. I mean, half the people that I talked to about this book didn't have any idea who he was, and I had to explain who he was, and I thought that was really sad. Harold W. Bentley, who was born in Colonia, Juarez, said it best to me. He said, "You can't believe what A.W. Ivins was. It just killed me how he is being forgotten. He was the greatest man we ever had in Utah. There is no question in my mind." And when I've read all of the different tributes when he was alive and right after his death and everything, he was so well loved, so well respected, so well admired, that it seems so strange to me that we don't know that much about him. So I'm hoping that with this book, more people will know about him. During his lifetime, he was very well known. There's even a town named after him, which there were some people here from Ivins. He was very honored when they asked him if they could name the town after him. He had gone down to do some help out and make sure things were done right. And he said, "Yeah, that's fine. You can name the town after me as long as you spell my name right." And as somebody who has a middle name, it's actually my main name, not spelled most of the time correctly, I can understand that. You want your name spelled right. So, when he was young, he made a name for himself. You read the stories of Tony, as he was called. He usually signed his name to his wife, T-O-N-E, but he was called Tony. And some of the stories that I've read about his younger days, which are not in the diary because they're before he's keeping the diary, there's a couple apocryphal ones. I'm not really sure how true they are. There is one that is talked about in a magazine article where someone pulls up to, I think, on a horse, rides up, that's the word I want, rides up to, I think it was the the St. George Temple, if I'm not mistaken. And, they were working at the courthouse at St. George. And the dismounter was a Gentile, he was not Mormon, and he was very upset. And he went up to a couple of the saints that were working on the courthouse, and he said, "I want to know where this white feathered arrow came from. You know, what Indian tribe? It doesn't look like Navajo or the Hopi make it." He says, it looks like it was handmade. I want to know who made this. And they said, "Well, go ask Jake Hamblin. He knows all of the Indian tribes. He'll be able to tell you." As soon as they get to him and they give him this, he says, "It's not from an Indian tribe." He says, "Tony made that." And the other man, obviously upset, says, "Tony who?" And so he has to explain who Tony is. And he says, "Where'd you find it?" He says, "I found it in my dead dog." So he wanted to know who had done the arrow, who had made the arrowhead that had killed his dog. They go see Tony, they go to his house, and his mother says, "He's not here right now." And she's appalled that, they would, accuse her son of, perhaps shooting at this dog and stuff. Turns out, Tony says, I shot a coyote with it, that was, you know, bothering some other animals and stuff, and I've never seen the arrow since. So, but he was renowned, even from his youth, as being a good marksman, good with the bow and arrow, and just a hunter, and horseman. He was, my daughter here loves horses, so she would really appreciate that. He was a horseman. In his diaries, over and over again, he will mention his horses. He hardly ever mentions his family. I mean, he does not mention his family much. I know he loves his family because I've read the letters, and I know how much he loves his family. But he mentions his horses. He's worried about one of the horses, and at first I couldn't quite tell the name. I thought it was a child that was sick or something, and I think it was colicking or something. And nope, it was his horse. He was really worried about his horse, and the horse did survive. So he was a real cowboy. He loved to hunt and fish. Those were his favorite pastimes. As I said, he was an excellent marksman. In 1958, he was elected to the National Cowboy Hall of Fame of Great Westerners. And there's only 5 of them, 5 Utah people that have been elected to that. Brigham Young, Jake Hamblin, Jesse Knight, and I'm trying to think who the other one was.
Clark.
Who?
Urban Clark.
Okay, thank you. This is not, you know, something that a lot of people were elected to. It was posthumous, but it was just a really great honor, I think, for him. And when you read, which is in the book, the tribute to him, I think, is excellent. It really describes him. He owned several cattle companies. He was involved in mining. He was involved in all kinds of stuff that, to me, made him kind of a true cowboy. I have seen pictures, and I think it's in the family book, of him with Buffalo Bill Cody. He took them on a hunting expedition in 1891 to Kaibab, south of St. George. He talks about attending the Utah State Fair. All of this stuff, this cowboy aspect, to me really intrigued me, and that's why the book is titled Cowboy Apostle. Cowboy Apostle. I chose the title mostly because I wanted something that meant him, that wasn't more about his church service or about anything else, but that really defined the man. And when I think of a cowboy, I think of somebody who's very forthright, who's very industrious, who's not so much a loner, but is independent and will get things done. And that is most definitely characteristics. He's not a slacker, that's for sure. When he was given something to do, he got it done. He was also very interested in some other things. He was very interested in the theater. He was both participant and a spectator. He talked a lot of times to his wife about when he was traveling, he would go to the theater, he named the plays, and but he was also in the plays in St. George quite a bit. His daughter recollects several of the plays that she saw her dad in. He also, as I said, was into mining. His daughter tells a story of how much he loved the idea of discovering a real gold mine. That was something that was kind of a dream for him, which he never did, but she said he got enough gold ore that he was able to make 5 gold rings for the 5 daughters. So at least they had those. He took, later on in his life, he took a great interest in Book of Mormon archaeology, and he wrote several articles about that, also Mormons and Freemasonry. I think he loved to write. He was very, very talented, very good. He would write stories. He would tell stories in conferences and state conferences. He talks about his bluebirds. I think it was his bluebird. Is it bluebird? I think it's the bluebird story. And he would talk about, other stories that he would write out for his children. And but he loved to do that. He was also a man that did not suffer fools lightly. And I guess that's something that I really like about him, is that he was polite, but he would really let you know when you crossed the line or when you did something that he didn't like. For example, in the League of Nations, when the League of Nations was being talked about, he got into a bit of trouble because they didn't want, I gotta see where I put that one, they did not want some of the people didn't like the idea of Woodrow Wilson's League of Nations. Well, you had Tony Ivins, and this is 1919, so at this time he is an apostle. He's not a counselor yet in the first presidency, but he is an apostle. You have another apostle, Reed Smoot, who is against the League of Nations, and you have Ivins in favor of it. And in 1919, it comes to a head, and the media goes wild because evidently at a state conference, Ivins mentions the League of Nations. And let me read you what the Salt Lake Herald said. His speech before the quarterly state conference at Ogden last Sunday was one of the most partisan political speeches ever delivered in or out of a church in Utah. Back then, politics and the church got mixed up a whole lot more than we let it happen nowadays. Mr. Ivins took an unfair advantage of his audience by forcing a vote under a false issue between patriotism and disloyalty. The system is the cheapest kind of political trickery and is entirely unworthy of the high office Mr. Ivins holds in his church. He goes on and just really calls him on the carpet for what he feels like was, partisan stuff. He says they called a vote in the state conference who would support the League of Nations. And it actually didn't happen like that. The state president got up and said some things, and it wasn't Ivins. He just talked positively about it, and then the state president was the one who did more of the calling for vote type of thing. Well, one of the other newspapers, The Citizen, really got after Ivins, and he said they did an editorial suggesting that there should be a debate between our senior senator, who is Smoot, and Apostle Ivins, one standing by the old Constitution and the other seeking to convince himself and others that the League covenant is a revelation from on high. He said that would be a magnificent contest. Well, Ivins gets angry and he fires off a scathing reply to Mr. F.P. Gallagher. He says, "Dear sir, absence from home and other matters which appear to be of greater importance have prevented acknowledgement of the obligations I am under to you for the unsolicited advertisement which you were kind enough to give me in your issue of August 16th. I have understood that men do not commit crime, murder, arson, theft, or perjury, for instance, without a motive. Consequently, I suppose some motive must have prompted the ungentlemanly, nasty creed which appeared in your paper. In order that a debate may be really interesting, there must be pronounced difference of opinion. I am strongly inclined to believe that should Senator Smoot and I meet to discuss this question as proposed, that the difference of opinion existing between us regarding either the Constitution or the League of Nations, if we spoke our real convictions, which we do, would not be sufficient to make an interesting discussion. If the purpose of your article is to create a controversy between Senator Smoot and me, it is a dismal failure, for no such controversy will occur. I admit that there are many burros in Mexico. They bear the burdens of the country by day and keep one awake with their midnight serenade. But I am obliged to admit that I have never heard a jackass bray louder and to less effect than the one who brays through your paper. Permit me to suggest that such articles such as the one referred to, if designed to strengthen Senator Smoot's position, may have the opposite effect. A copy of this goes to Senator Smoot. Signed, yours with supreme contempt, Anthony W. Ivins." So he has that side of him, and I like it. I just think, I love that he is honest and tells it like it is. May not have always had the most tact, but I like that. So he gets into the suffrage issue in the Constitutional Convention, and I remember he writes home to his wife and just, he's so angry. Right then I think it's B.H. Roberts that is against suffrage and Ivins is for suffrage, and he just writes and he just talks about so many of his things written home about the Constitutional Convention. He is so frustrated with the bickering, with the politics, and he says, we're here to do work and all we do is argue. All we do is just, which I'm not really sure is much different than the Congress and Senate today, but he was very upset about that. His letters home are a gold mine to his wife. Most of them are not in the book. I tried to put as many excerpts as I could in there. They just really give a really strong sense of who he is. you read the section from 1882 to 1884. It's when he's on his third mission. And it's very straightforward. It's telling what he's doing and all that kind of stuff. You read his letters to Libby, and he's very homesick. You would never know that from the diary. But he is very homesick. He misses his wife and his children and just can't wait to be back with them. He also gets very upset. And as a former Catholic, I'm a convert, as a former Catholic, I always kind of, reached out to some of the parts when he talked about it. He gets very upset at what he sees as just the religious superstition and some of the situations that he has to handle down there with the Mexican people. He loves the Mexican people, but he has a hard time with the government and the Catholic Church as it is. There's one point where he is called and asked to go to a member's home and dedicate a new bakery oven that the man has bought. And I think he's bought it actually for his son to do, or son-in-law. But he's very excited to go. That's great. We'll come and we will dedicate the oven. Well, when he gets there, it is a big party. And it is just, it's everything that he didn't want. He thought it was just, this nice little situation where he was going to go out and take care of that. And let me read to you what he says. Ivins was not happy about these other uninvited guests, or these other invited guests, and may have been confused about the cultural trappings or embarrassed by what happened. In any case, he describes the party atmosphere he encounters upon his arrival, remarking, "I was quite surprised when I saw these preparations. When he, Ortega, spoke to us, we supposed he wished us to go out privately and dedicate the oven and ask the blessing of the Lord on his new enterprise. And I, for one, did not feel well to think that he had invited in a lot of corrupt fanatics to witness and take part in a ceremony which they would only treat with ridicule and contempt." Well, the oven collapses before it can even be blessed. So he doesn't have to do it, but his comments to his wife are very telling. When Tony was called to preside over the mission in 1895, he states flatly he did not want to go. He was in the stake presidency in St. George. He had parents that were ailing. In fact, his mother dies as he's going back and forth to get his family settled. He had a home life that was pretty settled for him, and a future that he thought was going to be pretty good as a rancher in St. George. He also knew that it was going to probably upset some of the family dynamics because his wife was not in the best of health, so he was worried about her health. So this was not a call that he wanted. But as soon as he got it, he dropped everything and he said, "Yes, I will do this." Also at this time, the Utah State Convention is going on, and they are trying to elect a new governor, their first governor. And in the book and in other places, you will read numerous accounts of Tony Ivins being put forth as the Democratic candidate for governor. And this was something that he would have loved. He loved public service. He had done many things already. And this was very bad timing for him. But he never flinched. He said, "The Lord called me, I'm going." And he moved his family down there. They lived there until 1907, until he was called as an apostle, and he did what was asked of him. His mission down there, he was mission president, he was the War State president. His mission is different than what we would consider the mission president, what a mission president does now, with preaching the gospel, sending the missionaries out to, converts and stuff. His mission down there basically was more or less to provide a safe refuge for those that were still going to be practicing plural marriage. He was given authority by this first presidency to perform plural marriages. And he performed about 40-some or so. I can't remember the exact number offhand. But he did do that while he was down there, only with the authority that was given to him from the first presidency. It was a difficult assignment to manage because they were in a country that was very desolate, and it was difficult at times to even keep families sustained down there. They lived a very, very hard life at first. things did get better. Things eventually got worse when Pancho Villa came in, but by that time Ivins was gone and he was in Salt Lake. But he always held a place in his heart. He was always sent down there when there was trouble or when there was some necessity and stuff. So most people who know him from the colony phase, the Mexican colonies. He was so much more than that to me, though. There was so much more in his life, but that is a very important part of his life. When he moved his family down to Mexico, he made the best of it. And I was a little bit disappointed. The recent Ensign came out, and it has the church in Mexico, a rich history in a beautiful future. I was so excited to read the article because I thought it was going to say something about Ivins, and it doesn't. So I don't know why it doesn't, because to me he was very important in the history of Mexico and the history of the church in Mexico. It doesn't mention him, but as I said, he was more, his purpose was different than what a normal mission president would have been. People have speculated to why he was chosen, because it was a bad time. Why was he chosen? There's been several speculations. Some people think that it was just his experience in Mexico, that he was monogamous. He did not do plural marriage. Was it just to get him out of the way for Utah politics? I wrote a talk on that. It does not appear that they tried to get him away so that he wouldn't be the Democratic governor because they wanted a Republican governor. That actually doesn't appear to be that, and I gave a paper at MHA about that. There's years before that they were talking about him. They were just waiting for the right time to move him down to Mexico. I think they knew they could trust him. Ivins was a man that when you asked him to do something, he did it. And there was just this element of trust and faithfulness. And they knew that they weren't going to have to worry about all the other peripheral things. That Ivins would do what he was asked. And he would do it well. And he had such business sense that I think that really helped with the colonies down there. So in my personal opinion, I think that's why he was sent down there. I'm going to skip a little bit. Ivins also did a lot with the Indians. Some of you may be familiar with that. He helped, especially the Shivwits, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, Shivwits Indians. He was really concerned for their welfare and felt they needed to move to another area by the Santa Clara River. And he had some resistance. The chief was all for it, but the chief's son was not for it. And he was able to, maneuver and help and get the people there to get the assistance. He was actually an Indian agent. And because of his help with them, the Indians just absolutely worshipped him. They just loved him. They thought he was so wonderful. I don't know if any of you have been over to the Utah State, Natural History Museum. My husband and I took our grandkids there, and all of a sudden we're walking on one floor, and I see this picture, so I had him go back and take a quick picture. If you can't see it, because I'm sure you can't in the back, it says, Tony Ivins, he no cheat. And then it's Shivwits Indians. That was a very, very common saying among the Indians. Tony Ivins, he no cheat. They knew they could trust him. And it was just, if he said we should do something, we should do it. Because we know that we can trust him. When he died, one of the Indian tribes held their own funeral memorial service for him. That was very, very touching. One of the things that I love most is, this is written by his son, Stanley Ivins. And I won't read all of it in the interest of time. I don't even know how long I've gone. Am I almost done? Somebody? Anybody? So, but Stanley Ivins wrote an article about his father that ran in the Instructor from November 1943 to June 1944. It was serialized. And this one part, when I read it, there was a sadness when I read it. It's about Ivins at the end of his life. But let me just read some of it to you. It says, through his membership in the Salt Lake City Rotary Club and other public activities, he formed a highly prized acquaintance with many leading men of the city who were not members of the church. Looking back over the long years of his busy life, President Ivins recalled with great pleasure his associations with these many outsiders, and he felt that in his contacts with them he had made more contributions to the growth of a more amicable understanding between the Latter-day Saints and their neighbors. As he reached the age at which he should have been able to take things easy, his responsibilities increased and his duties demanded more of his time. Talks about what it was like, in the last days, of his life. He was writing the book on Mormons and Masonry. It also said, and this is something that I've tried to adhere to, he said he finished the book on Masonry, but his own story was never written, although he twice began it. The first time he compiled his journal to the beginning of the year 1900, but at the second attempt he only got through the first few years of his childhood. He could not even find time in the later years to keep his sketchy journal up to date. He wanted so much to write his own history. He did not want anyone else to write it. And as I did the book, I tried to keep that in my mind, that this was not a biography, that I didn't have the right to write his story because he wanted to write it. I mean, his family certainly has the right to do that, but I'm not part of his family, and I didn't want to take that right away, but I wanted to put out as much of this wonderful man as I could. Very little time towards the end of his life was spent in relaxation. My husband loved this. He said he never learned to play golf, a game which he said was fit only for women and fat men. Any of you golfers out there? I apologize. He purchased a fine saddle horse, but he could find no time to ride it. And although he was still an enthusiastic fisherman, a fishing trip usually meant a long journey by automobile, from which he returned tired and not rested. And it talks about his birthday on September 16th, 1934, his 82nd birthday, surrounded by most of his family of 8 children and 22 grandchildren. He received many different things. And then on Friday the 21st, a week later, he worked all day at his office and in the evening took his usual nap in his chair, went to bed only when reminded of the lateness of the hour. Sometime after midnight, he waked in great pain, and Dr. Clarence Snow was called and told him that he had suffered a severe heart attack and must remain in bed for a few days. He protested that a man in bed was good for nothing. Throughout the day and night of Saturday, he was kept quiet with sedatives and suffered no pain. At 4:30 on Sunday morning, he passed peacefully away. He had gone as he wanted to go. He had been ill about 26 hours and had missed only one day of work, and that was a Saturday. The sudden and unexpected passing of President Ivins came as a great shock to his countless friends among people of high and low station in life, and of many nationalities and creeds. Messages of sympathy came from those in high political, business, educational, and religious positions throughout the land. They came from Democrats, Republicans, Catholics, Protestants, Jews, and Mormons, and from just plain people. The Paiute Indians of southern Utah, who had made him an honorary member of their tribe, held a tribal ceremony in his honor. His funeral in the packed Salt Lake Tabernacle was an impressive testimonial to the high regard in which he was held by those who had known him. One of the speakers at his funeral was John F. Fitzpatrick, who was publisher of the Salt Lake Tribune. And Stanley says the fact that one of the speakers, meaning Fitzpatrick, at his funeral was the publisher of the newspaper which had for so many years served as the mouthpiece of the most bitter enemies of the church, was a fitting tribute to the contribution which President Ivins had made to the development of goodwill between Mormons and non-Mormons. And it was symbolic of this goodwill that the Tribune reported, as the cortege passed the Cathedral of the Madeleine, the Most Reverend James E. Kearney, Bishop of the Catholic Diocese of Salt Lake, and members of the clergy stood on the cathedral steps to pay homage. I felt so sad after I read that because I thought all the wonderful things this man has done. It just saddens me that, like the other man said, he's been forgotten for so much. And I just think he was a terrific person and had so much that he gave to the church, to the world, to the civic, organizations, to the state. And I hope that this book will help him be brought back to remembrance. Thank you.
Let's steal back that microphone.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, oh, actually, you should keep it, I'm sorry.
Oh,
We're
okay.
gonna do questions and
Okay.
answers, sorry about that.
Oh, that part.
I was so
Be
busy
nice.
clapping that I didn't think. That was terrific, thank you. So questions?
Easy question. The 2 books that you worked on, do we know, did they ever get published? Are they in manuscript form?
I think they got published in pamphlet form, is from what I remember, because I've seen some pamphlets of them. So in the archive. So I think they were published in pamphlet forms.
And then just a general announcement, if anybody wants to see video footage of Anthony Ivins, they have it on YouTube. You can go to YouTube and do a search for LDS leaders from the early 20th century. And Anthony Ivins is one of the gentlemen that they
Oh,
filmed.
I didn't even know that. That's
Yeah.
cool. Great.
Weren't the Shivwits Indians an obstacle for grazing land for Tony Ivins? And wasn't that, let's say, mutually advantageous?
I don't know. It
relocate
could have
them?
been mutually advantageous. Nothing that I wrote said that, or nothing that I read said that specifically. And I didn't do a lot of research on that particular aspect of it.
Or let me say it this way, weren't his 2 herds up on the Kaiparowitz plateau where the
I'm not even
Indians
sure
lived?
he owned the herds at that point in time, because we're talking 1919, and I think he had divested himself by then of the herds. Because he tried to sell, there's letters that he's writing back, and it's in the late 1890s when everything's kind of in a depression recession, and he's trying to sell everything he can, including the herds and stuff. So I'm not sure that he even still owned them at that time.
My understanding today that there's not very many Democrats in the Quorum of the 12 and First Presidency, but didn't Ivins, when he came into the First Presidency, didn't that make
3.
3 Democrats? And was there a little
Yes,
tension over
Heber,
that?
Heber was his cousin, his first cousin. Heber J. Grant was his first cousin. And he conferred with, I want to say, was it Penrose that was in the presidency with him when Anton died? Anton H. Lund died, and so there was a vacancy in the presidency. And he said, he says, I'm really worried. I really feel that it should be Ivins, my cousin. But that makes 3 Democrats. And Penrose said, forget it, that's dumb. I mean, why would you even worry about that? Go ahead and put him in, he's the best man. And everybody pretty much, felt that he was the best man. So yeah, it did make them 3 Democrats. I don't know what the ratio is now at all. So I know a few of them are University of Utah fans. I've seen that. Yeah.
Well, I worked for Cleon's Castle for 28 years, and his grandpa was Ivins Bentley. I wonder if he was named after him. He was the one who would go up to check on the missionaries through Pancho Villa's camps, and Pancho Villa would dress up as one of his men and hear the gospel. And years later, when Pancho Villa died, he appeared to President Ivins Bentley and asked for his work to be done. He was wearing a pinstripe suit and spats.
Really?
They had to go to Durango to get permission from his widow to have the work done. And I just wondered if he was named after him.
I would bet he was, because the Bentleys were very close to them. I mean, he's
That's
mentioned
where
in,
he grew up.
yeah, they all grew up together, so I would imagine he was probably named for him.
It's a shame that we didn't know more.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's good this is out.
Okay.
Beth, would you talk just a little bit about Anthony W. Ivins and post-manifesto polygamy?
Okay, what's in the book is, there is in the book in the back, Grant, right, thank you, it's H. Grant, Ivins, Heber Grant, Ivins' explanation of his father's and his work there. Basically what I have from Ivins, what I know, is that he was given permission to perform post-manifesto plural marriages. To be honest, I was really glad on the church website just recently they put down a history of polygamy, and they put 1904 instead of 1890. There was the initial manifesto, but that did not apply in their minds outside of the United States. Now, there were some still done in the United States, but for the most part they were either done in Canada or in Mexico. And Ivins was given the authority, and he usually performed them in his home. They had to have a letter from the First Presidency with them that Ivins actually would have already gotten a letter saying these people are coming down, so that was kind of correlate. They had to have permission. If they did not have that permission, he would not perform the ceremonies. And he did not perform all the ceremonies that were done, though, down in Mexico. Some of the visiting apostles would come and they would perform some of them. So, but he did it. He himself never took a plural wife that we are aware of. The Salt Lake Tribune, when he was put in 1907 as a general authority, accused him of being a polygamist, said he had been married to a woman named Miss Nell of Tokerville, and they had an 8-year-old son. I did all the research I could. I could not find anything that corroborated that. But Ivins was, from other sources, was close to having a plural wife. But I think the manifesto nixed that in 1890. In fact, he writes home to his wife just very cryptically. You know, he's writing about other stuff, and he just says, how did he put it? I wish I had the letter. The manifesto pretty much ends plural marriage, but ends was not the word he used. And I've always taken that to mean that he was just saying that generally, and I wondered, did he actually mean that personally? Was he in the process of maybe possibly taking a plural wife, and then once the 1890 manifesto came through, you know, that stopped. He did write to his cousin Heber and say that later on in, I want to say 98, but it could be wrong, that he was willing to still take another wife if the brethren wanted him to. But obviously they didn't ask him to. Now, when I talked with Guy Ivins, his grandson, I asked him why he didn't enter plural marriage, and his answer was one word: Grandma. So, and I know with working with Anton Lund and Saini, his wife, you know, the wife sometimes have to stay there. So, yes.
Do you have any insights into a possible relationship with Abraham Owen Woodruff and their work together down in Mexico? Does that come up?
I know that they visited a lot, but Ivins doesn't mention a lot except when Abraham dies. I think he feels that he was foolish, that he did not get the smallpox vaccination. Abram said, you know, I'm on the Lord's errand, so I'll be safe. And then he and his wife both died. But he was close to Woodruff's second wife, Avery. I mean, she lived in his home for a short time, and she had a child down there and everything. So he was definitely close enough to the family, but I don't know how close he was to Owen. He's just mentioned, but I do know that I think he felt that it was a loss, that it was, you know, it was something that could have been prevented if he had had the vaccination. He would not have died. So,
can you tell us your experience in writing your book and the history you gathered? Are his journals and letters in libraries, or are they
yes.
family? Or how did you get your hands on all this information to compile the book?
All of the originals are in the Utah State Historical Society. I had copies given to me, and the copies I worked at from home. At this time I lived in Wyoming, in Casper, and I went through them twice at home with the photocopies, and then I would come down on periodic visits and go to the Utah State Historical Society and then check a third time the accuracy against the original, because some of the copies, actually, I was missing a few pages when I saw the originals, and then plus they were handwritten. They're very small. Most of them are just like this. They're little insurance books that were given out as freebies, you know, date planner type of stuff. And he would just, you know, scribble in those in pencil and stuff. So yeah, it was a very tedious process, but I really got used to his handwriting. So now, when I see something else, we were looking at some other letters that were very graciously loaned to us from Kathy Ivins, and I thought, oh wow, I know that handwriting, that's Ivins, because it wasn't in the section that we knew was Ivins and stuff. So, yeah.
So, when you gathered that information, was there anything outside from family and from grandchildren that you had to gather as well?
I have seen some of the other stuff. I got loaned a few things from Guy Ivins, who lives in American Fork. He loaned me some of the stuff that the family had, and then I gave it back to him. Most of Ivins' letters are up at the at the Marriott Library, and they are wonderful. They're fantastic. The family has copies of everything. I think that's up at the U. Do you have copies of all the historical stuff too at Utah State? So the family has copies of all that. But it is completely available at both of the libraries.
Okay. So after he died, everything was basically turned over to the library.
I would imagine it was given to Stanley first, and then Stanley donated it, is what I'm thinking the provenance is.
Okay.
So, and then Stanley took over at the Utah State Historical Society for a while, and so all of that stuff was given then.
What year did you say he was thinking of running for governor?
It would have been 1895. Yeah.
The first one.
Yeah, 1895. Yeah, he was the leading candidate. There's a lot of newspaper articles. They're all, appalled. The church has got to let him go. We've got to let him become the Democrat, become the next governor. Surely the church will let him become the governor and they won't force him to go down. But to Ivins, it was not being forced. He talks in his journal about, I was running, all these people were telling me I needed to run for governor and stuff. But then a letter came from the first presidency, which changed my whole life. And it was like, case closed. And he would not let them run for him. So.
You indicated that he was an Indian agent.
Mm-hmm.
Did this post date Jacob Hamlin, or did he have any connection there with Jacob Hamlin?
He doesn't mention Jacob Hamlin in his diaries except for the first mission to Mexico. I don't know when was Jacob Hamlin an Indian agent? Do you know the dates?
We have Todd Compton's book here.
Well, I'm not sure he was an Indian agent, but he was a missionary to
Yeah, he was a missionary to the Indians. I'm guessing this was after, but I'm not sure. Does anyone else know? I don't know enough about Jacob Hamlin to know time frame or anything, so I'm not sure.
I just wondered if they crossed paths at all.
If they crossed paths, he didn't really mention it later on. But
because his son married Jacob's niece.
that's true. So they knew each other, obviously. I mean, because they were both from the same area. So yeah, they obviously knew each other. Whether they crossed paths in the Indian aspect, I'm not aware. But they very well could have. So it wouldn't seem that unlikely.
I got a question. What did you come across in your research about what was his motivation in writing the book on masonry?
He never mentions it in the diaries. I only know that from external sources that he was doing it. He never mentions that. In his later years in the diary, he's not writing much. And what he does write is mostly either went to this state conference and he tells you who spoke and that, or he does tell a little bit about some courts that he has to be on in some situations and stuff, but he's not writing much about himself at all. And he really doesn't throughout all the diaries. He writes about some of the experiences, but I get the impression he doesn't think, that his thoughts are that important to record. It's more, what's happening and stuff.
Just in answer to the earlier question, Jacob Hamlin passed away in 1886.
So that was pretty early.
So,
For
they
Ivins,
wouldn't
yeah.
have crossed over.
Yeah, they wouldn't have crossed over there.
I do have a question for you. How did you get interested in this project and get involved in this project?
I love editing, and I started working with Lavina Fielding Anderson doing editing for the Journal of Mormon History, but I wanted to do something more, and I had heard through the grapevine that Signature did these diaries and stuff, and I asked Lavina if she thought I was up to that, could I do that, and she put me in touch with Gary, and I went, and I guess the rest is history. So, yeah.
How did you come onto this project?
To this project, Gary had all of the diaries. He's with Smith Pettit, and he had the diaries copied because I think other people were interested in doing this, but nobody ever really got to the point where it really was going to be published or anything. So, and I just started reading, and he was just so fascinating to me, and I just kept going and doing them. I started about 5 years ago. Finished about a year and a half ago, and then the last 6 months has been getting it really ready for publication. And like I said, up until 2 years ago or so, we were living in Wyoming, so everything was long distance and coming down and doing that.